Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How are you today? I hope you are always healthy. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hidayah Dian Utami. Today, I will explanation about my proposal, namely use of podcast on listening understanding of EFL students at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. Okay, next. Introduction. Background of the problem. English is an worldwide language spoken all around the world. There are more than a billion of human beings around the arena who talk English and use it as a 20 or several language. They talk English to speak and additionally recognize what record could be conveyed among the two or extra observers speakers. This technique we call for at the last of the speaker and or one listener to speak and additionally to get and records as well. This technique calls for English capabilities and one in every of them listening. Listening is described because the act of listening actively that a moderate state that listening as lively listening. That's vital for powerful communication. Listening also can be described as extra than simply listening and know-how and decoding the dead means of a conversation. Those the primary talents that an English learner ought to have is listening. Podcasts are a series of spoken digital audio files that user can download to their personal device for easily listening. Podcasts are based on original audio or video recordings, but can also record television or radio broadcasts, lecture, shows, and other events. From from file formats such as audio and video to podcast that broadcast a channel program to viewers. Listeners can enjoy the program all day, read and work, especially in multitasking activities. A sample podcast for multitasking people in Apple iTunes https www.apple.com iTunes podcast fanpage. When it come to content podcasts are meant to be entertaining, changing, sharing, and lead. The time the reader took the subject of the use of podcast at the listening comprehension of EFL College student SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung as in change into tests from preceding students discussing the impact of podcasts on listening comprehension of EFL student carried with the aid of using Triyanti Abdul Rahman, Noni Baslama, and Muhammad Rizky Widodo that the Getting to Know Apply podcast for this listening. Challenge is one manner to make a college student inquisitive about a getting to know to concentrate and additionally make a college students no longer become bored, quick, and there also are wonderful modifications concerning the impact of podcast and a podcast on a college students listening comprehension in AFL teaching more precisely it a change into discovering that a podcast a change college students listening comprehension ability and additionally college student can consider a new vocabulary with the aid of using the use of a podcast for listening and getting to know. The following is the students hold that the readers like due to the fact there are similarity and additionally of part there are periods from practicing students with research performed with the aid of using the modern author. The first examined performed with the aid using Trianti Abdurrahman, Noni Baslama, and Muhammad Rizky Widodo that is about the impact of podcasts of EFL students' listening comprehension. The finding found out fantastic and a result concerning the impact of a podcast on a college student listening comprehension EFL. coaching, and getting to know more precisely. It is part determined that podcast can enhance college students' listening comprehension. The similarity of practicing students with the students that I researchers like allies white witness the impact of podcasts on college student listening comprehension. Witness the EFL version. This is carried each content using digital gadget and the choice of suitable subtitles via way of means of grading college student to fulfill mastering of objective. Meanwhile, the distinction is that preceding student become carried to describe the effect of a podcast on EFL college students, listening comprehension and use qualitative students at the same time as the researcher himself. They serve to make a look at using podcast on EFL. EFL student and for his own research. Research considered listening to listening media because of the interesting phenomenon of studying learning media, especially podcasts. Podcasts are audio or video files uploaded to the internet that can be accessed by individual and viewed using a computer or portable digital media player, whether subscribed or not. Brown A and a Green podcast is now a very much needed media for millennials. So non-media reasons are easily accessible to all users, including children, students, and teachers. Researchers use the podcast method to provide new innovation in a classroom listening learning, keep students interested in listening and not bored, and encourage, encourage education staff to use podcasts for listening learning. Based on the background of the above issues, researchers are interested in the study 2020 until 2023. Use of podcast for listening by EFL student in SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung for grade 8. Okay, next. B. Focus and sub-focus of the researchers. Focus and sub-focus of the research builds at the heritage of the hassle about the focal point of the students is use of podcast at the listening comprehension of EFL student at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. The students' cognitive conscience is then dimmed down into three sub-focus as follows. The first, how do interruption take out the form of podcast program as a way to be analyzed in listening student at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung? And second, what software did the instructor of pupil at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung pick out to apply listening student with podcasts? And the last, students are guided via way of means of the instructor in studying to pay attention with podcasts to pair it a college student can analyze greater without problem or have typically. Next is problem formulation. Thus, at the history of the trouble above the trouble, in this situation, the researchers formulate as follow: how do college students learn how to concentrate with a podcast, and it is smooth to drive college students pursuit and ability to research listening. Okay, next is objective of the research. The research goal, the research should achieve are the first to find out the teacher choose the type of podcast application used for listening learning in SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. Choose to use listening learning in their podcast, and last to find out If a student can learn more easily or find it difficult, the student will be guided by a teacher to learn to listen on a podcast. And next is relevant research. Based on the title of the survey above, the author found some findings related to the survey to be conducted. The first study conducted by Trianti Abdul Rahman Noni Baslama and Muhammad Rizky Widodo was about the impact of podcasts on EFL student hearing ability. This research shows positive result regarding the effect of podcasts on student learning comprehension when teaching and learning EFL. More specifically, podcasts have been found to important to improve student listening comprehension. However, the success of a podcast depends on the teacher ability to use such a tool and the selection of appropriate material in a way that guided learner to achieve their learning goals. The similarity of preceding students with the student that I researchers align within side, the impact of podcasts on a college students' listening comprehension within side the EFL version. This is implement each content using digital gadget and the choice of a suitable substance via way of means of guiding college students to safely getting to know objective. Meanwhile, the distinction in the preceding student turned into career to decide the effect of podcasts on the FL college students. Learning comprehension and use qualitative students even as the researchers himself decide to take a look at using podcasts on the FL college students learning comprehension, and for his personal student, the researchers use qualitative students. The final have a look at performed through Jerry Justinity, MTS, Arif Indah Susilawati, Muhammad Aras, and Gilang Saputra. This is about understanding the podcast, listeners' intonation toward perceived usable moderated by content destinity, a change study of podcast listener in Indonesia. The effect of this have a look at confirmed that listener relevant in a is a take into consideration critical to steer the listening goal among podcast learners to the questionnaire, and a result found out a good belief of learner relevant in a considered their activities. The order of importance of learner element in a process of effect on a listening goal and perceived usables are moderate through the experience, the exercise, content material destiny. The similarities between previous students and the one I students are in the way listening learning is done using podcasts. The difference, on the other hand, is that previous research was done to determine the intent of podcast learners to precious. The useful mitigated by content destiny is a chess students study of Indonesian podcast learner the research themselves wants to investigate the use of podcasts, whereas they use a qualitative study, research use qualitative research for the understanding for interview by PFL student and for his own research method. To resolve a problem, a positive approach is used consists with the issue, account number to be discussed. The approach becomes like in order, and then take a look at can a produce a fine and definite dependable data. The strategies used on these students are: the first is research type. The type of survey used in this survey is essentially qualitatively described. Field survey and the survey method product describe data in the form of words that are necessary and can also be observers or people's word. To do this study was used to investigate the use of podcast in the learning comprehension of EFL students at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. The third is research data source. In this study, research used secondary data collection by sending a study result to SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung teachers via document, archive, or record. Okay, next is Number 4, research subject method. In the study, research used secondary data collection by sending study research to SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung teachers via document, arsip, or record. Number 5, data collection method. The technique we utilized in accumulating records on these observers are as follows. The first is interview method. Interview is a qualitative student's approach that is based on asking inquiries to gather data. In interviews contain or gather people currently considered one among whom is the interview asking question. In this study, research will behavior direct in interview with English students, instruction and college students. Researchers can even behavior obliquely interview through questionnaire to college students who could be randomly decided on in keeping with their class. And last is documentation method. Documentation approach is a way used to overfake written side the shape of notes, transcripts, newspaper, magazine, and minutes. Documentation approach is likewise used to accurate fake approximately students. The students within site they study around the use of a podcast at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. And next is number 6, data analysis method. The first is data reduction. This it summarizes the data obtained by the researchers and used into complete the study. And the second, data presentation. At this time, the researchers select data presentation as a manner of figuring out the students to be student through the researchers. And the last is drawing conclusion and verification. The initial conclusion presented are still tentative and will change if a strong and supporting appendage is not found during the data acquisition phase. The conclusion presented are valid if the conclusion made in the early stage are supported by valid and consists appendage when the study returned to the field to collect data. Okay, next is literature review. Podcasts are an innovation for sending audio file and a program over the internet. These include audio that you can listen to on your computer or download to any digital device for later listening. As mentioned, podcasts are audio program on the internet and in some cases, video program, usually updating episode on the regular basis. Okay, next is description of the research object. Okay. The first is general description of the object. Podcasts are audio recordings published on the internet that are defined as a source of information of learning Asmawati. Podcasts are seen as a new information for building student listening and a speaking skill, speaking SDA. Podcasts have a different type of a content. It can be in the form of Rosel Aguilar for audio, video, images. Podcasts are no use on radio, television, and social media to convey interesting information to listeners. And last is fact and data display. To explore the element of podcast in listening learning, researchers use framework framework of qualitative descriptive nature. In this framework, the research process general descriptive data in the form of word or word from individual that will and observable. This study was used to test the use of podcast in hearing by EFL student at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. Next is next, I will always read quotes today, namely, face the challenge and upstage the approach. You to achieve success on the day, you will be proud of yourself for being able to get through it all. Okay, now I want to explain about important proposal research. This time, the writer took the subject of the use of podcasts at the listening comprehension of EFL College students at SMP Negeri 29 SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung as it a change into test from practicing students discovering the impact of podcast on listening comprehension of EFL student carried out with the aim of using Trianti Abdurrahman, Noni Baslama, and Muhammad Rizky Widodo that getting to know apply podcast for this listening challenge is one manner to make college student in questing about getting to know concert and audio make college students no longer become bored quickly, and there also are wonderful modification concerning the impact of podcasts on a college students listening comprehension of in EFL teaching. The following is the students who that the writer select due to the fact there are similarities and additionally apart there are periods from pretending students with research performed with the aid of using the modern author. The first examined performed with the aid of using Trianti Abdurrahman and Abdurrahman, Noni Baslama, and Muhammad Rizky Widodo. This is about the impact of podcast on EFL student learning, listening comprehension. The finding found out fantastic and a result concerning the impact of podcast on a college student listening comprehension in EFL, coaching, and getting to know. More precisely, it is for determined that podcasts can enhance college student listening comprehension. The for determined that podcasts can enhance college student listening comprehension. The fulfillment of podcasts, however, relies viewpoints at the teacher competence with using such defines and the precise choice of the substance in a manner that currents the newscoreman to fulfill the getting to know objective. Similarity of preceding students with the students that I researchers lies within sight the impact of podcast on a college student listening comprehension within sight the EFL version. This is carried out each content using digital gadget and the choice of suitable substance via way of means of grading college students to fulfill mastering objective. Meanwhile, the destination is that preceding students become carried that decide the effect of podcast on EFL college students, listening comprehension and use qualitative students. At the same time, as the researchers themselves decided to the to take a look at using podcasts on EFL college students' listening comprehension. And for his very own students that Richard Search use qualitative students. The last study conducted by Jerry Justinity, MTS, Arif Indah, Susilawati, Muhammad Aras, and Gilang Saputra. This is about understanding the podcast listener intonation toward perceived usable, moderated by content destinity, a chance study of podcast listeners in Indonesia. The result of this study assert that listener experience is considered crucial in improving the listening intonation among podcast listening to the questionnaire result revealing a variable perception of listener experience. Listener experience represented the activities. The other significant of the listener factor in terms of the impact on a listening intonation and precious usable are moderated by high content density. Okay, the similarity between precious students and then once I students lines in the way listening learning in a tone using podcast. The difference on the other hand is had precious research way done to determine the intent of podcast listening to practice the usables might get by content destinity in a chance study of Indonesian podcast listener. The research themselves want to investigate the use of podcast, whereas they use a qualitative study research use qualitative research for the listening comprehension of EFL student and for this own research. That's all my explanation about proposal use of podcast on listening understanding of EFL student at SMP Negeri 29 Bandar Lampung. The last I say, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.